engagement. I would just like to first allow you, give you a platform to have some first initial remarks on the report itself. I think perhaps also reflecting within that the importance of having this engagement. You know, I started off in the media when I was about 17, 18 years old, just straight out of high school. And the AMB has always been one of the stable resources that I've used along the work produced by the APPR and others. And I really want to just urge on now. I know that many people have been saying there's a bit of a decline in support for some of these reports and so on. I just wanted to urge on the FES before we start with the panel discussion. Please continue the work that you're doing with the AMB. Before we start the panel discussion, just a quick house in-house announcement.
I'm wearing a mask because I have a cough, which is a prolonged condition, and I'm trying to figure out what exactly is causing it. So I'm doing this for your protection.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. Yes. I think the long-term trends that come out of this edition of the AMB, it sort of emphasizes things that have played out on the media sector, and I mean, if you look at what journalists point to, what the analysts pointed to over the years, over the last decade and so on, and things that are emergent at the moment, you'll see the trends are sort of in keeping, and I mean, it looks like a mixed bag, but on the whole, it isn't a trend that will ultimately be a positive trend, I think. It at some point, it either has to make a curl upwards, positive, or it has to dip and become a negative trend. And I think if you look at various indicators, it is tending more towards the negative. And we're all casting about for how do we arrest the situation. I mean, there are some recommendations made, responsibilities given to various organizations and so on, and that's all good and well. But I think the confluence of factors that are undermining our media sector, it's not just Namibia, of course. There are other countries in the region, other countries in the world where this is also playing out. The confluence of factors, I think, make a individual organizational attempt to address them to be a task. And it isn't the one thing that fixes anything. There's too much happening, and too much continuing to happen, and too much happening beyond the scope of our media ecosystem that will continue to impact on what's happening in our media sector. Now, a lot of what I'm saying might sound a bit vague and so on, but I mean, if you look at the report, if you read the report, you'll sort of notice that there are things that really should strike you, and there are a number of things being mentioned. And I think the law and policy and regulation making in the digital space, ultimately, from next year onwards, will have a very big impact on the future of the online sustainability of the media, especially news media, especially investigative journalism in this country, which already is sort of a niche a journalistic enterprise in Namibia. One of the issues I have with the report is that it throughout refers to the NBC as a public broadcaster. NBC is not a public broadcaster, it's a state broadcaster. So I mean, I think that's something that has to be corrected in future editions. NBC does not have a public broadcasting charter. It does not have have an independent board. And even though in December 2020 CRAN did give it a public broadcasting license, I don't think it has lived up to that license. So I do have an issue with that, with the NBC being referred to throughout as a public broadcaster, which it is not. But other than that, I think as I said, the substantive issues, the issues that affect individual journalists, the reason why a union was founded and established, the well-being and not just financial, but also in terms of mental health aspects and other health aspects of journalists, of media workers, really, has come to a point where they really need to be addressed. Economic sustainability. I mean, that's something that did not start with COVID. COVID exacerbated a situation that has been prolonging since for most of the last 10 years, from about 2015-16, and that's because of the economic situation in the country. The country went into a steep economic decline from about the second quarter of 2016. And this, of course, affected advertising and marketing budgets and so on, which has affected and continues to affect media houses, and has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I speak from experience in this regard. I was a shareholder and editor of Inside Namibia magazine, which is a media product which I was very proud of, and Ngeni was previous shareholder in that, and I think it had a place in this market, in this media market. But one of the main factors at the end was we couldn't keep it going because advertising had dried up by 2018-19. It wasn't economically sustainable to keep going. We had to make less and less, do with less and less, and it just couldn't continue at some point. Now, that wasn't the only factor, but that was the main factor that closed us down, even though it really was a niche media product that could have had a future if conditions had been different. That said, as I started off saying, I think there's a lot there for us to discuss, and I really would like to hear what others have to say about those who've read the report, and then there are issues to debate as well. Thank you very much.
100%, thank you. Jemima, of course, practicing journalist. Obviously, you will be on the panel speaking for the room of journalists that are represented here. But your immediate reflections on the report coming out, and the need for having this sort of information available, data, particularly not only for editors but also for journalists that are working on the ground with the citizens.
One to all. I'm there. I have to disappoint you. I am not going to speak as long at length as Patricia has. I'm a woman of few words. But yeah, as he's pointed out that yes, we've seen the tip in certain areas it is tipped to the positive, in certain areas it is tipped to the negative, and it is very important, as much as we pride ourselves as Ms. Emily said earlier, and even Ms. Fryer, that we are a trailblazer in Namibia in terms of press freedom, that we have something that holds us accountable, which is now the barometer, because we've also seen that, like he's also, by the way, I am representing the first ever media union, Namibia Professionals Media Union, which was born out of these challenging conditions that journalists are working under, which is one of the indicators. One of the indicators that was mentioned there, where we actually fared relatively well, but even so, as much as Namibia, yes, we are doing fairly well, but there are serious issues that need to be addressed. The issue of compensation, that is still a major issue. You will still find in leading newsrooms where people take it for granted that because people have a reputation for years. People assume that these people are treated very well, but they are oftentimes not. Those are issues that need to be addressed. Perhaps legislation should be looked into since the minister is here. And also mental health issues that we have now seen. People are somehow taking it serious. In the past, you dared not say a word, and for some time, people have seen journalism and almost well, there was this picture out there that journalists are alcoholics because at most events that they were, and yet they are under so much pressure that they end up self-medicating with alcohol. And yes, you are laughing, but these are the realities. And we have normalized because we are losing brilliant journalists because of these issues that are not, number one, they're not addressed. Number two, people are just, I don't have time for you. I'd rather get 4 interns to replace a brilliant journalist who's going to give you 5 proper stories in a day. And the intern is going to give you scrapes. And the compromise is at the end of the day, quality of information. So yeah, I believe that as much as Namibia is doing fairly well, reports like the Afro Barometer is of utmost importance for us to hold up a mirror to us every 5 years, whenever it comes, so that we know this is where we are lacking. Because obviously, I believe Namibia is signatory to so many laws, so Namibia is definitely committed. We've seen it. As much as we've seen us taking a few steps backward, there is a commitment from some sectors that we would like to do certain things better. So yeah, those are my few words.
I think from an editor's perspective, it's always a different lens that you have to balance, of course, the interest of working force, also considering the business of media as well. Mr. Mpane, what were your initial reactions and responses, of course, to the results of the barometer?
First, I should declare that I was part of the panelists who compiled this report. So a lot of it didn't surprise me. But what I would love to share with the public is how rigorous and how much we differed among ourselves during compilation of this report. So even with me having seen the compiled document, I'm actually surprised at the scores, despite having had an appreciation of that discussion that went in there. And I think part of it is really the issue of how complex an environment news media is operating these days. You mentioned from an editor's point of view, having to balance survival of an institution versus
Public service.
Public service versus even just paying journalists what they want to be paid. So this balance and these issues are really not as straightforward as sometimes we think. I mean, sometimes it looks like there's money, the institution is making money, and therefore why don't you pay your journalists? Meanwhile, there's so much else that comes in the way. Not only the Namibian economic, the economy that has literally gone down, but you also find that internationally, the digitization, how it has changed the media landscape so much that it's so tricky. It becomes so difficult. The sources of survival, advertising, for instance, you will see it a lot now on the Googles and Facebooks of this world. So it's not just that the Namibian economy has gone down, it's that the model that used to keep us going, the business model, has also changed, that the sources of income, the traditional sources of income have dropped, and we have to adjust. So we have to find a balance between investing in new business model, growing that new business model. Of course, there's always a lag between that and the survival of the media institution. My biggest concern is in between, because I'm not so worried that news media will always be needed. Journalists, strong journalists will always be needed. In fact, they are needed much more now than before, because now journalists have to play that interpreter role, that role of making it easy for people to digest information in a world where you can more or less get information anywhere at any time, and whether the information that they are getting is correct, and they just assume, they consume it. One simple example I came across recently while in a taxi is how the taxi driver was praising Russia for clobbering the Ukrainians. It's good that they need to be killed. Why did they decide to be on the side of the Americans? And for me, it was so sad that it's not so long ago that Namibia itself had to decide to fight for its freedom. Besides, Russia and Ukraine were on the same side not so long ago. I mean, little over 30 years ago, they were one country. So, us so far away, instead of actually looking at this situation and just be in solidarity, at least with the vulnerable people, that we basically choose sides based on Russia and the USA. It's sad. It also tells me that we need many more people who can interpret the essence of what is going on in our lives. For me, a needless war is causing us a lot of harm, even in Namibia. We feel it in our fuel costs, we feel it in the shops, yet a lot of human beings are just consuming this news without so much of a thought as what are really the issues. So I think the Afro Barometer, because it touches so much on many topics, including sustainability, that is where it really matters. And I hope a lot of us can make use of it for a long time.
Of course, so on this, Mr. Ngitila, I think you're probably going to have one of the more difficult tasks today when we open up the floor, representing the government here. Of course, you have to balance between creating that conducive environment. We, at the same time, want media to self-regulate. At the same time, we also want to make sure that the rights of everybody within the infrastructure is protected. What were your initial reactions to the AMB and some of the results and findings?
Yeah, thank you, colleagues. The initial reaction was, I think, the ministry issued a press release through the office of the ED, and I'm happy that my ED is here. I'm safe. So we really applauded the.
By the way, the ED has been upgraded to status of Minister for the Night.
So we have indicated our satisfactions of the report. Of course, the government will continue to create a conducive environment for the media to be able to do their business. I've been listening to colleagues, particularly when it comes to condition of services. It's true, there might be a need for some policy interventions and regulations. But again, government doesn't want to be seen dictating the media space. That's why so far, so good, we continue to be guided by Article 21 of the Namibian Constitution, of course in tandem with Article 144 that ties all media
practitioners, not only in Namibia but elsewhere in the world. So we are quite satisfied that the report could be used as a self-introspection, particularly the media practitioners. They need to really get organized in a way that they live up to the current environment that requires a lot of innovations, considering the digitations of the media space. Things have changed completely, but if you don't play relevant to your readership particularly, you might end up losing that kind of space. So it's important that media stay relevant, media scale the environment up with a changing environment, not only in Namibia, but elsewhere in the world, because the world has changed. Things have changed, and it's no more business as usual. So I think for us, the barometer, it's an indication that we need to do more than what we are doing now.
I think in the interest of also allowing you to appreciate the diversity of the panel, I would just like to also share the panelists that represented and that were of course part of the deliberations that provided us with these results, the outcome that we're discussing today. The media was represented by 5 role players. Dangina Mupati, of course, mentioned himself a little bit earlier as well. The private media editor, print, online, and radio at the Namibian. Jemima Beekes was also part of that. Mr. Peter Denk was representing the public broadcast. Of course, he's a veteran at the NBC in as far as current affairs production is concerned. Mr. Max Hamata, private media editor, also represented there, and Leve Katire, representing the community broadcasting where some of us had started. So they were the 5 that made up the panel from the media representative side. From civil society, Ms. Emily Brown that presented us with the results, and then Kabihiwa Maungora, trade unionist, a long time and experienced trade unionist, Adilokwe Thenge, the gender activist, author and journalist. I think she shot to fame over the last 2-3 years with the Shut It Down movement. And then Mr. John Nakuta, human rights lawyer, academic, Shiwela Chombombi, activist for people with disabilities, and Zoe Titus, a media freedom, free expression activist. So it was quite a very diverse panel that I represented. And I don't want, the reason why I'm pointing this out is I know, of course, that the NBC is going to come up time and again. So there was representation internally, of course, from a public broadcasting perspective by Mr. Denk and others as well. I wanted us to go step by step with the sectors, but I think in the interest of time, I will just point out some of the positives and the negatives that were highlighted as part of the summary, and we can deliberate on those. And I would just like to, of course, also open the platform for the Q&A session so that we can have a sort of an engaging conversation. We know, of course, the positive stuff are the good things. The formation of the Namibia Media Professionals Union, NAMPU, the solidarity shown within the media has also been highlighted as a positive, and the level of editorial independence shown by the NBC has also been highlighted as a positive. The other 2 positives were that there are new players in the broadcasting sector, public, commercial, and community. I think we know it's changing. There's a lot of online media platforms that are also coming up. But if you're an editor, I'm sure Mr. Mubali, and of course also former editor-in-chief at the New Era, chief programming officer at NBC, you will have a different view in terms of the quality of information that comes up that the traditional news media houses have provided, with the balanced view and so on. And I think finally the permanent employment of NBC's former contract workers has really also been lauded in the report as a positive. And for such diverse representation to take notice of that just shows us the importance that NBC plays within our media structure. But the real questions are on the negative developments. And I wanted us to really just reflect on that as well. The media sustainability question was something we touched on. Again, I wanted us to just reflect on that a bit. Federico, I know you've been doing a lot of research in this space as well. How should we start approaching the issue around media sustainability? We see even in Europe, traditional media houses are struggling to keep up with the online media platforms. Everybody's starting a podcast. Citizen journalism is out of the roof. We're not really concerned also about those editorial practices, the traditional editorial practices anymore. It's about who comes first to market. So how should media houses start that transition, or is there even a transition for that matter, from traditional media to digital media and still sustaining the old revenue models that were sustaining the media houses.
Right.
It's for you.
Oh. All right. Yes. Look, I mean, one of the things that our journalistic media, news media, are playing at digital. None of them are doing a very good job at harnessing the online space. And the use of social media, for instance, by our news media houses, is oftentimes very cringeworthy. So we haven't yet transitioned into the digital space. How the online space is being used by journalists and media organizations in other parts of the world. Namibia is taking child's steps here.
So you're saying basically that the quality of what is being provided
online, yeah. I mean,
is linked to the
yes. I mean, all of this is linked. I mean, this is a confluence. There's a confluence of factors here. One of my personal criticisms that I saw during the COVID-19 pandemic from very early on was that a lot of Namibians were getting their COVID-related information on social media. And the Namibian news media were not in that space countering the disinformation that their audiences or 21, some news organizations started actually actively engaging with disinformation online, COVID-19 related disinformation, and disinformation in general. But for the whole of 2020, you had the situation where the news media was not where their audiences were. And people were, I mean, I spoke to people and they were saying things to me like, I'm sorry, Mr. Link, we don't believe the journalists anymore. I don't want to hear about what the journalists have to say. And this reflects what's happened in other parts of the world as well, around COVID-19. But it has translated into other areas of the media environment. And this is a sustainability question. Because if you look at, you take the African Media Barometer and you look at it in conjunction with, for instance, the Afrobarometer, and see what the public says about the media. In the 8th round of Afrobarometer in 2019, before COVID-19, the perception of Namibians was that journalists were less trustworthy than politicians.
Don't say it out loud.
Journalists were less trustworthy. I'm going to say it again. Journalists were less trustworthy, according to the public, than politicians. Journalists were in Afrobarometer. You can go and look it up right now. It's online. Journalists were were identified as the number one source of the question was asked about fake news. Number one source of fake news. That's what the public thinks of Namibian journalists. Now that you take the African Media Barometer, you take the Afrobarometer, you look at them together, and get a picture. That's a sustainability question. Because your future markets think that you are not credible as news organizations, as media organizations. So they will not become consumers of your media products. And in an ecosystem that more and more is driven by data, by metrics, by engagement, and these sorts of things. Where advertisers look at these aspects and they see that you aren't enticing readerships, you aren't attracting new eyeballs and so on, then what happens? The MTCs take their money to Google, the banks take their money to Google, you open up a random website and there's Bank Vinter trying to sell you something. The advertising dollars are moving in that direction. Now, there's a lot. I mean, I'm being very, adopting a very doomsayer perspective here, but you know, this is a reality that Namibian news media and journalistic media needs to look in the eye.
But Tangani, I want you to quickly come in there as well. I think sitting in the position that you're sitting in as an editor, do you agree with those assertions? Of course, obviously the results are there, as Rico is saying, you know, the untrustworthiness in journalists, but more so the product that's being put online is not up to standard. That's one question, but of course the other one is also, are those that provide that revenue to you, the corporates, also coming to the party? Are they also understanding that shift that's happening from the traditional media into digital media, and are they willing to back their dollar? What's your experience?
I wouldn't question the research, because generally people will say what they feel, and that's more or less what they feel. But you have to appreciate that the research would have generalized. So in general, and I think everywhere around the world, many places around the world, there are a substantial number of people who don't want to believe in what the media is giving them. No matter, and I think no matter how much you would want to convince Trump's people those are similar things here, until the fish rod stories of this world come out, where people can see, suddenly can connect how a few people were becoming so rich and others losing their jobs. Only through that kind of work would we regain our credibility. So it's not a straightforward thing. I think as Frederico seems to want to be simplistic, that it's the journalists who are failing to reach their future audiences. There are a lot of factors. There are really a lot of factors, intricate factors at play. And you would see on WhatsApp groups, the Namibian gets stolen and shared all the time. So there must be a good reason, I would think, why some people do that. Unfortunately, it comes at the expense of sustaining the Namibian, because the very people who would say they don't believe in media, they would still want to access that same news, but without paying for it, or without helping to sustain those journalists. So I think there's a lot at play that we would have to deal with for a long time to come, just because of many things: the economy, the Namibian economy, the digitization, the world economy, just a lot of factors.
I would also just like to urge on our viewers that are joining us on the live stream on the FS Media page, as well as on the Namibians, the social media platforms, to please punch in those questions. We will provide a platform for those questions to be responded to. My audience here as well, after this one question that I want to ask to the Director for Print Media Affairs at MRCT, I will also open up the platform for you as well. So I hope you're ready for that engagement. We've seen, Mr. Ngitila, that we've scored quite. I think for me, I was very surprised to see the scores that we received in Sector 1 and Sector 2. Because I would like to think, in as far as the law is concerned, and I think one of the positives perhaps that didn't come out was the issue around the passing of the Access to Information Bill, still to be promulgated. But we've seen. I would like to believe really that when it comes to the issues around law and regulation, that we are quite in a solid position in the country. But the 2.4 and 2.5 for Sector 1 and Sector 2 seems to be attributed to what they're saying here as a negative development. One of the ones that we pointed out, the increasing harassment of journalists and civil society by the state. What are your reflections on this? Because this is one of the the biggest negative developments that are coming out from the report?
Yeah. That remains perception.
You don't agree with that position?
Well, everybody is entitled, but we know our situations. I would say from 2018 onwards, Namibia has been ranked as #1 as the freest press in Africa, #1, and occupying, I think, the 20th position around over the world. And for us, those rankings, they count, and we look at them seriously. When particularly 2017, Ghana, I think, took over as the #1 press, freest press in Africa, we took a position that we will regain our #1 score in Africa. And we committed ourselves, and we managed to retain our #1. This year we are overtaken by, I think, Seychelles, simply because they deregulate the defamation law. I think that counted very well on their part. But still, our position is we will continue to advocate for that #1 position in Africa. Saying that, we have seen, particularly when there are demonstrations, and I think that is something that media houses has to really take up seriously. You have journalists, instead of necessarily the work of a journalist. What I'm saying is we are advancing free, independent, and pluralistic media. How independent it is, how pluralistic it is, how free it is, remains a question all the time. Because it depends on who is managing what. And most of our journalists, really, at one point when we were having some discussions, we were thinking if we could maybe come up with a college or something where we could really train and retrain our journalists. Gone are the days when you have people like my brother here, you could see even the Namibian. I don't like missing out. I must always buy my coffee, because they stay the course and they maintain that. But others also, we do read. But what we are saying is media should remain faithful to their leadership. They should remain faithful to their clientele, we are talking about the issue of sustainability. It's an issue of credibility. It's an issue of ethics. And if you go out of some of those principles, chances are you lose out your customer. It's a rapport. It's all about rapport if you want to remain relevant. And for those that are expressing those sentiments, is their rights, but we know our situations. Just go outside Namibia, and visit some countries elsewhere.
So you say it could be exaggerated.
I would really think these are people just trying to play relevance in the media space. As far as we are concerned as government, we continue to create that conducive environment where our people continue to operate as media practitioners in a spirit of free and independent space where they are regulated by Article 21 of the Namibian Constitution. I would really think so.
Well, I think before I give it to our audience, Jemima has really been giving me a death stare while you're giving these responses. So Jemima, I just want to give you that platform. As a practicing journalist, what has really been your experience? Honestly, I mean, are we looking at a situation where journalists themselves also don't adhere to what they are supposed to do, such as wear the jackets, etc., as pointed out by Mr. Ngitila, or are we seeing basically a little bit more aggression on the side of how things are being handled by law enforcement officers when it comes to journalists?
Thank you, Ricardo. We absolutely are seeing a more aggressive approach to the media by the authorities. And I see the authorities are increasingly using that excuse that journalists are not appropriately dressed. However, we've had instances. I, for one, with a colleague from the Namibian, I was manhandled at an event where everybody knows us and where we were invited to. And we were even threatened when we walked out, and we were told that you are lucky that you were not shot. How does that bode for conduciveness? I would like to put to Mr. Ngitila. Then I would like to take you to the mass protest at the Chinatown. NBC journalist with his card identifying himself was shot with a rubber bullet in the leg. So exactly how should they identify themselves? Another journalist with a jacket actually that says you've seen those jackets. The media, she too was attacked. Then I take you back to the Shut It All Down, where in fact Ndilo started gaining prominence. One of the participants of the barometer report. Even there, the police was very aggressive towards the media. So in the past, if you had gone somewhere, it would you wouldn't think twice about taking a child along, because Namibia is a free country. I actually at some point felt I went there with I had picked up my 5-year-old from school, and at some point, as much as we had told them we are journalists, they were just angry, the special field forces. So at some point, I had to actually take my daughter back home to return and do my homework. So these are facts. These are.
Some would argue that these are isolated incidents. It might be an exaggeration to make a blanket statement saying the increased harassment of journalists and civil society by the state.
Well, I've mentioned, I think, probably more than 5. If we use mathematics and we are 2.5 million, how can that really be a generalized statement? How would that look like in the mathematical equation?
Let's open up the platform for the questions. Do we have any takers for now? If there are any questions online, I'm also just trying to see whether we have any questions on the online platforms. Again, to our audience, thank you so much for making time out to join us on the live streams of both the Namibia newspaper as well as on the FDS media. Your questions and comments are also welcome right now. Do we have any takers? I see there's one hand there. Can you please take the mic to it? Do we have any more takers in terms of questions for the panel? And then also, Mr. Ngitila, I will provide you with a platform to give us a response to that as well. Just your name and your organization.
My name is Liz, and I don't have an organization. But I'm really curious to know, you said that there was quite intense debate around some of the indicators. Could you give an example of an indicator that required a lot of discussion and back and forth?
I think that one goes to Kangeni. Okay. Do you want
we have taken note of what Siska is talking about. Of course, not government you shouldn't. You have to be mindful that in a situation like that, you must be able to differentiate between government policy and individual actions. Those are isolated incidents, and we have been following them. And sometimes also it's a matter of individuals involved. How well are they aware about protecting the rights of our journalists? And I think it's a matter or it's an issue related to awareness and education. And I think that is something that we can always talk about. And also members of the media should also continue educating our people on how to behave and what is ought to happen and what is expected from them. As law enforcement officers, they come from different backgrounds and orientations, And I'm not here to defend those who were involved in such actions, but the point is that's not a state policy. There are situations where when you do your work, a government position is well known, and it's clear that this is what you need to do. So it's a matter of how we educate our people, particularly law enforcement officers, when they are attending to such kind of situations. It's regrettable. We know it happened, but those are human errors and individuals that were involved. It's not a state position. Thank you.
Tony?
I think before I answer the question, I think Mr. Mitila is too much on the defensive. These are not isolated incidents. What we are talking about is examples, plus there is a pattern that has been occurring, especially over the past 3-4 years, of hostility towards media, or even not just towards media, but towards free expression, and that is the test, really. How they treat the public is a major test of whether the media is also free to do their work. We shouldn't have to have journalists marked on their forehead that I'm a journalist, so that I can't be shot with a rubber bullet. Demonstrators these days, in fact, the police has even recently announced you have to pay a certain amount to organize a protest. So these are indicators, a pattern of what is happening. As it is, there's still a cabinet decision, I think that was taken in 2015, to give preference to government-funded media, both for news as well as advertising. That, when you talk about a conducive environment, already tells you there's a government-driven attitude towards free and independent journalism. All right, let me move on to addressing the issue of which areas. I think almost at every point we really had rigorous debates and discussion. One of them is about the state, or as I would prefer to call NBC, the government broadcaster. Are the journalists and editors there self-censoring, or are they being censored? So the debate went back and forth, and I think you might see it in the voting or in the scoring.
They're saying here that the outcome, the positive developments, is that a level of editorial independence shown by the NBC.
Right. That's also the general outcome. But if you look at the actual scoring, you would see how widely the panelists differed in providing those scores. Another is the editors and media owners versus the journalists, the reporters on the ground, the camera people on the ground, the videographers, the people who do the legwork. So we differed quite a lot on their expectations versus what we, the editors and media owners, and the media owners are able to provide. And I think Jemima can bail me out on that in terms of details.
I know there's a hand here and another one here as well. We'll give platform here first. If you can come here first, and then we'll pass it on to the back. Let's start here first.
Thank you. Hey, my name is Nika Platt. I run a peer agency for Namibia. FES, thank you so much for these initiatives. I think it's really important to have these discussions so that we can have tangible results. My question and comment, maybe it's being done, with the research. You know, when we, let's say if my son comes home with a 25% or 50%, we always say, how can we do better? So, okay, so here we get a 3.1%, here we get a 3.5. Is there a structure in place at the moment? And this is maybe just for thinking for this evening afterwards. How do we move from a 3.1, 3.5, 3.2 to get us to that 5? You know, how do we use all of our expertise here tonight as journalists? And I appreciate all the journalists. You make the news really newsworthy by saying, where are the tangible action plans by saying the stereotype of journalists being drunk, or, you know, having more increased payments for journalists because they're the brand. How do we now, with the results that we have, move from the 3.5 to get to that?
So I'm a former YLDP 2020 alumni graduate. So my question is very simple on terms of media. So in terms of judging the integrity, the honesty of the media of a country, what elements do we use? And at what extent does the public influence journalism, and at what extent can we judge the news released by these different media houses? Does the pressure, because I believe I had a friend that was working at Windhoek Observer, so the pressure to release the news on time also gives them some of the hicks up to skip news. So does this pressure that journalists get to get the business running and to release newspapers also that doesn't give them maybe enough time for them to release real true information or them to interview people on the ground? Thank you.
Fair question. Thank you very much for that one. Is it directed at anyone in particular or the whole panel?
Thank you very much. My name is Maho Baraka. My question is to the representative of the government. And I want to take the issues of dressing code serious. Had the journalists of Agizera during the fish rot investigation had wear a jacket or wrote here, should the information of double, round off, I paid 4,000 for prostitute, should that information came out? That's the question to you. Should that, or had that journalist worn the jacket, could this information came out? That's the first question. The second question, do you want to tell us that the government have adopted an approach of imposing a dressing code on journalists so that they can be seen? Is that a government policy? What do we want to move towards? Because in the journalism, journalists have to go and dig out information. How do you dig out information if you are? In fact, if they go unidentified, it's the best dressing code for every journalist. For you to dig out and see how the other people are being mistreated versus those that are practicing the journalism. So those I want to comment on that. Whether you have a government official policy on dressing code of journalists, and if you don't have, why are you always referring to that? Secondly, the experience of Al Jazeera about the doubling and rounding off and 4,000.
Thank you.
That we have good journalists in Namibia, and on the other hand, we also have journalists who are source of misinformation and fake news. With that, I was looking at the methodology that was used, whereby I would like to ask a question to say if 10 to 12 experts are used to score who are from 6, 5 and more are from the media, are we not going to have some element of bias or fairness? And this question I directed to Mr. Mpale. If we have more from the media, what about the issue of fairness and bias? And also the last one is the civil society. How was it represented in this methodology? Thank you.
Almost missed the bus. But what Jemima said.
Name and organization.
Junior, I'm a student
engineering student, so basically I don't know much about journalism, and etc. But I have to speak what Jemima said. That doesn't only affect in particular. Can I get another mic?
Use your natural voice.
That doesn't only affect journalists in particular, because you have a situation where we, the Namibian citizens, encounter a brutal act on a particular protest where the police officials are now harassing the natural, or should I say, the average citizen. So if I now grab my phone and record that particular scene, why am I being attacked by the police? Because I'm not showing any act of violence. So my question to the government official is a thing called citizen journalism, and if it's such a thing, what procedures do the government take to ensure that we are not attacked at protests if we're just streaming something that is not right? I thank you.
Thank you for that. I think, Mr. Ngitila, we'll start with you and work our way back in terms of the questions. Perhaps you can open up with that one in terms of the reflections on citizen journalism.
Yes, colleagues, a platform like this one, for us as government, we are learning every day. It's not to say, I'm now again going back to my brother here, it's not to say I'm playing defense here. But what is important is we should understand what's the government policy and what individuals within probably government systems do to our people. I'm not defending what happened. But a platform like this, particularly us from Ministry of Information, we use this kind of information to design campaign concepts on various interventions that we need to undertake with various OMAs, particularly with colleagues from Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Defense, to continuously engage them. And that's why, in many cases, we have a platform where we invite editors to meet with us, to talk issues of common concerns and interest, with a view, of course, to correct the situation. And we are happy that you are able to raise some of these issues, and we are taking note of what you are saying. Getting back to my brother there, citizens journalism, this is a new trend, and if it's not guarded properly, it's tend to be misused. You should put yourself in a law enforcement situation where you have to save lives. So it's a lot of things that are involved. And of course, education is one component that we are always emphasizing. So we cannot say you are free to do your citizen journalism. Of course, you are guided by the Constitution. You have your constitutional rights. Your freedom is guaranteed. But how you do it, it's another issue that maybe reserve another debate. More so particularly the attitude of individuals sometimes, I'm not saying always, dictates to the kind of reaction they get. But I'm not here to speak on behalf of the law enforcement officers. But us from Ministry of Information, it's our job to continuously engage the colleagues and tell them what is required particularly when doing law enforcement exercises. Same with my colleague over there talking about the jackets, whether there is a policy or not. Well, each situation is dictated by what is happening. You have seen journalists covering wars in Ukraine, where they are wearing their jackets at all times. And that is meant to protect journalists. It's not meant to say if you are covering your news story, you are required to do ABC. But particularly when you are going to demonstrations and protesters, you should be mindful of what is likely to happen. Government policy, but it's just a practice, it's just a good practice that's happening in the media space. Same referring to Al Jazeera story. Well, Depends, because you use various techniques to get stories. And that is the profession that you are employed to do. As government, we are not saying when you are coming to me, you want to interview me. All I would require, of course, from you is to identify yourself from which news outlets you're coming from. Other than that, of course, there are other various techniques you use to gather stories. But you are all overall guided by Article 21 of the Namibian Constitution. I think that should be understood. But a platform like this, if I have to repeat, we use it to understand what's happening with a view to go and do homework and probably do some intervention mechanisms. I think.
Tangani, some questions that came your way as well.
Okay. The one that came directly at me is the panelists who are journalists. I think it only serves a better purpose when you have the industry players look at these issues. The questions or the points that are being looked at are exactly about the conditions of media, the conditions in which media operate. So if you take only one journalist and so 10% of journalists on that panel and the rest are from other industries, you are not likely to get very strong day-by-day feedback. So I think there is a bias, but it's a positive bias, if I may put it that way. How do we get to a better score? By implementing some of the basic things. I mean, Namibia has taken decades to just have legal instruments, policies that promote access to information, like this access to information law. I don't know how many laws have come before Parliament. They were passed in no time. They were promulgated and carried out because it serves certain people's interests. Frankly, this issue of Namibia being ranked so high as the freest, having the freest news media in Africa, it's a ruse. For me, it doesn't reflect the reality because a basic comparison with South Africa. South Africa has laws that forces the state institutions and private institutions actually to open up and proactively provide information, not just to the media, but to the public. For me, that is a high test. That's a good high bar that I don't have to depend on my dear friend Audrey Mate as executive director to tell Mr. Nitila here, you can release that information to Tangeni or to a report or to a member of the public. It shouldn't be like that. We should proactively do what is right, and then we can say we really are having an environment that is conducive to access to information, because that's really the issue. Ordinary people struggle, or let me actually put it the other way around. The reason why, or one of the reasons why Namibia has so few rich people and so many poor people is because the majority don't have easy access to information. The rich can easily meet, talk among themselves, submit that tender application, and then they get it. The guys who are going to do the work are the poorer ones who don't have easy access to information. So these are some of the things that we really need to work on.
I think the one I really don't want to lose, and in the interest of time, I'm afraid I'm not going to take any more questions. There's only one online question that I really want to issue around the pressure on journalists to meet deadlines, etc., for the business that could hamper them producing quality journalistic work or information. And if you can just quickly, very briefly, Federico, reflect on that.
Yes, there's an issue that I don't think came through in the report, and there's the issue of media capture. And this is something we've seen playing out on the Namibian media landscape. This is a concern globally in the news media sector, where you have politically affiliated, associated, connected individuals opening up, taking over news media organizations. Now, we've seen that with a number of our long-standing media organizations where politically affiliated and associated and connected individuals have taken over these organizations. And some of them have been, they've been used quite, I mean, I've documented this, I've done research about this, it's available on the AMB website. They've been used to disseminate or to try to be a counterbalance, a countervailing voice to, for instance, the independent news media, to create confusion in the news media market, create confusion within audiences about what is actually happening. And of course, then you have the dominance of the state media sector, which shies away from reporting on proactively on things like fish rot, for instance. And so you have a media setup that is ripe, that is full, that is being polluted by disinformation, political disinformation. And we've seen that around elections, and we're going to continue seeing that around our elections. So the issue of media capture and its impact on the media environment is something that we have to start looking at.
Others would argue, though, that Federico, that I mean that's what democracy provides. We have a diverse landscape. Anybody can get up and open a media house.
That's true. That's certainly true. But you know, the certain aspects that the engineering student at the back there raised. You know, we're at a point where there has to be serious investment in media information literacy, and specifically a component of news literacy. That people can discern between what is actually happening here on this, who is saying what, who these actors are, what are the messaging here, what are the narratives, what is the impact of framing. There's a lot happening, and I can hear from the questions. You know, there's a real need for media information literacy, for news literacy initiatives in this country, for it to be included in curricula from the earliest ages.
So that I can know that if I'm reading a story from a certain newspaper,
that you can see
ownership influences.
Yeah, you can see what is happening here, and I think that is something that has to happen. I didn't see it. I might have missed it amongst the recommendations, but that is something that certainly I have been thinking about working in the disinformation space and the fake news space. You know, we are way past time that there needs to be information literacy interventions at a national level in this country.
100%. Let me intervene there quickly. I want to close off the panel discussion. I would have actually liked to give you parting shots, but unfortunately, in the interest of time, I'll park it there. We've got a cocktail reception where I think we can